welcome to the X Culture Research Interest Group second Zoom meeting of this semester. We had a very productive meeting about a week and a half ago or a week ago with guest editors covering their journals. But this is always an interesting meeting and one that I find very useful. We've done this once before, but it's a meeting focused on using X Culture data and publishing with it. It's a very, very large data set. There are some nuances to it, and this meeting is meant to cover that for a lot of people so they better understand the data and what are the potential uses of it. So with that said, we have Vaz will lead this discussion and bring us through all of the things he thinks that are relevant for the data set and using it. And then we have several other guests here that are very experienced with using this data, both from an analysis perspective and publishing with it, and can bring tremendous amounts of insight into that discussion. So Vaz, I'll turn it over to you.
And maybe I'll present first my co-webinar hosts. So Mariana Gunkel, so Bolzano, Italy, Wendy Farrell, Salzburg, Austria, and Ernesto Taboletti, Macerata, Italy. So these three people have, and actually we have more people here who have extensively used X Culture dataset. I see Livio here, I see Antonis, I see Lily. So a bunch of people actually have, oh, Justin Kramer is actually here, so we need to pull him in as a co-presenter as well. So these people have used X Culture data extensively in multiple studies on multiple projects. And so the goal for us today here is to share with you what kind of data we have, our collaboration principles, and also show you some useful places on our website and in our files as you're trying to navigate how to find the data, how to learn more about them. And I'll start with some technical stuff. And then hopefully my colleagues here will share some insights from their experience as well. And we set it up as a meeting, not as a webinar, so everybody can speak at the same time. So on the one hand, that means that keep your microphones muted if you're not speaking. But on the other hand, if you do have a question, feel free to join the discussion, and we can manage it more as a round table rather than a one-way presentation. So I'll get right into it. So let me just make sure that everybody can share screens when needed. So the best place to start with X Culture data is on the X Culture website. And here we have a tab for researchers where you can find information about the data, research projects, publications, request data, collaboration principles, and things like that. But before I get into those details, first, let me tell you a little bit about the data we have in general. So you all, I assume, know what X Culture is. So we have, for example, this semester, a little over 6,000 students from about 160, 170 universities in about 40 countries by the location of the university and about 70 countries by the location of the students. And so we place those students in global virtual teams. Each team is comprised on average of about 6 people or so. And typically everybody is from a different country. So we may have some teams where we have 2 American students, for example, and then 4 from other countries, or 3 from other countries, combinations like that. So the original idea for the project was purely educational. So we all teach international business, and we thought it would be a good idea to give our students an opportunity to sort of experience international business in real life, so to speak. And so we thought we would place them in international teams and give them something to work on. And as they work on that project, they will deal with time zone differences, linguistic differences, cultural differences. And by doing so, they will experience in real life what we're trying to explain in the video lectures. But then clients started coming our way, real companies. And so now students basically serve as virtual consultants to this semester, I believe it's 8 companies. We used to have more, but now I'm trying to limit it to 5. We always end up with more, but still, a sizable group of client companies. And so, and then, yes, students kind of learn international business by doing international business. So the first 2 times when we did the project, or maybe 3 times, we didn't really collect any data. So we did have a post-project peer evaluations, but that was pretty much it. And then I was at one of the conferences, and a PhD student approached me at that time saying that I'm working on a dissertation and I'm trying to collect data. I don't remember what was the nature of the data request, but she was saying, can we maybe use your students, at that time about 1,000 of them, and collect data? And I thought, wait a second. I mean, we can collect data for this student, but we can collect data for other studies. And so we started collecting more and more and more data. And at this time, the database contains something like 3,500 variables, and they are in different sort of entities, as Justin called them. So the guy who kind of put together the first more or less organized database. But so we have data that are individual level, so things that describe students. We have data that are team level, that describe teams, like inherently team level things like team size, or number of countries on the team, or things like that, or average distance between the team members on the team, things like that. Then we have some data about professors. We have some data about the class and university. We have some data about countries. And then we keep separately the qualitative comments, because the file becomes too big if you try to keep it all. Even though the comments come from individuals, we keep them as a separate entity. And we have a separate data file for peer evaluations. Again, that one has a strange different structure. It's more like matrix. And then we also have separately evaluations of the reports that the teams produce. So professors' evaluations of the reports technically could be team level data, and we have summaries at the team level, but we also keep it as a separate file because there are a lot of things going on there. Now, in terms of the sources of the data, so we have self-evaluations, where students sort of report, or self-reports rather, where students report things. But then we also have peer evaluations. We have instructors' evaluations of students' work. We have administrative records, such as students taking tests, or timing of when they submit the reports. And then, as I said, we have qualitative and quantitative data. And we have many variables are measured longitudinally. So some are measured every single week. So there will be 5, 6, 7 rounds of data. Some are measured maybe twice or 3 times during the semester. And so we have those as well. In terms of what kind of data in general we collect and what they can be used for, so most of the data deal with whatever's going on in the teams. So obviously we have information on the individuals, such as demographics, experience, education, age, things like that. But also we have all kinds of things on the teams administratively, like the team size, the team diversity, but also what's going on in the teams. And much of that is collected for administrative purposes, like, have you experienced any conflicts? Is everything clear? Are you communicating with your team members? Peer evaluations. So we use them extensively in research, but those are the things that we need for the administrative purposes as well. We need to know if there is a problem in the team, if the team has elected a leader, if everything's clear, if they know what needs to be done, things like that. So we collect those kinds of data, but then also we add a lot of additional sort of surveys for different specific and sometimes even unspecified studies, such as, for example, we almost every semester measure cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, often measure IQ, cultural values pretty much every semester. So, and then obviously all kinds of, peculiar things, such as maybe how well acquainted the team members are with one another, or maybe some sort of a narcissism scale, or maybe some scale for communal orientation, or conflict resolution scale. So depending on what data are requested that semester, so there may be some unique data file, unique variables, unique scales used in the data file. And so I'll show you a couple of things just so you have a better understanding of what it looks like. So that's the general website. I'll close it. But when you go on the site for researchers, here you can find more information about the data. I'll open it just in a second. You can also see a tab for research projects, and these are presumably the ongoing research projects, more or less updated, so it doesn't contain some of the latest research projects. For example, we have a lot of work going on around AI, use of AI in academia, use of AI by students, use of AI to improve student experience. So I have not had time to add those. And I see there are a couple things here, like this one has been published, but it's still showing up as ongoing studies. I need to move it into published studies. And so this is the list of all of the studies that have been started and presumably have not been published yet, or I have not had time to update it. And I'll just open a couple of these just to give you some examples of what it might look like a study description. So for example, if you go and see here gender roles, so here is a I open something randomly. So Grishma, Justin, Amanda, and I tried to do something there. I actually have not checked because I was barely involved in this study, so Justin may have more information. But so at the last update, here you can find the big research questions. You can find some of the variables. You can find some of the sort of relationships that are being tested in this research stream, and some of the variables included, like the big five. Evidently here, there is some sort of stuff related to biases and things like that. And even this one, it's actually a very good description because it contains all of the questions of all of the variables, and even some implications of the study, and even some references that apparently could be relevant here. And you can see who is leading the study in case you have questions, or if you want to have, I don't know, maybe some input, provide some input, or join the team and things like that. Just as an example, here is another one. So this one is member satisfaction in virtual teams. I opened it randomly. So Mariana apparently at some time planned to do something. It's a very short description. So we can ask Mariana if she has done much about it, because it looks like it's been 4 years. So
I think that's published.
Oh, that's published. Okay, we need to update it. So yes. Here is another one on time zones, a little bit more detailed description, and you can see all kinds of things. So this one even describes what kind of analysis were planned to be done. Conspicuously missing from here who the lead author is. And so it seems like it morphed in something else, and so it just became a different study. So it's a good place to start, just to see what kind of studies are possible based on what has been done so far. But also it's a good place to start so you don't end up sort of reinventing the bicycle, because many people would come and say, for example, oh, let's see if cultural intelligence predicts performance. Well, that has been done many times in different variations in different studies, and you'll see it here. Maybe you'll also think about something like, yes, maybe gender roles. Do men, perform better than women, or the other way around? Again, you'll see that something has been done along those lines. Probably an even better place to start would be to look at the published studies. And again, for most of them, you would see a PDF file, and you can actually open the full file and you can read it. So some of the publications, like apparently there is the book here. Here are some papers. Here are some dissertations. I believe I had a few, yes, doctoral dissertations. And I have not updated the list. We had, I think, 2 or 3 more that I didn't get to, and even some conference presentations. Again, mostly outdated stuff, because now there is so much at conferences. Like each year we present probably at least a dozen papers based on X-culture in different variations. I'm just not keeping up, so just too many presentations each year. But yes, you can see here, like this one was published as an open source book, so you actually can get the whole book here, and then some papers just like this, so you can get the full whatever working version is available. So if you click on the data, you can see some description of the data, things that I said, general description, but then you can open code books for each of the levels. And again, these are more or less recent, but I think it's like 1 semester delayed. I'll show you in a minute what those code books look like. So publications we looked at. So I'll go through that in a minute in a little bit more detail. An important topic, and we'll get to that. Maybe I'll ask my co-presenters here to share their experiences. But so sort of, we've never had any conflicts so far from what I at least am aware of. So you would think that with so many people involved and, publications, careers at stake, there will be some tensions. I don't think we've had any major issues, but we do have sometimes issues where, for example, people sign up to be a co-author and don't deliver. Sometimes we have situations where people sign up to work on a project and then either lose interest, or maybe move to the industry and are no longer interested in publishing, or retire, or even die. We had those cases too. Or simply the data were not quite telling the story the person expected. The hypotheses are not as strongly supported as we hoped. And the person thinks, maybe I'll do some more analysis later. because what I have is not quite publishable and it just becomes dormant and sits there. We even had a few studies that were presented at conferences, like there was one on proactive personality. So we even have like some sort of a draft of the paper, but it has not been sort of pushed forward. And so we developed some principles here related to how we collaborate. Like, for example, everybody needs to recognize that we all live in a publish or perish world. So we all need to publish. And it doesn't mean that if you use Xculture data, you have to make everyone on the admin team a co-author. In fact, no, just simply collecting the data, we don't believe that that constitutes a reason to be a co-author for me or for Justin or for Wendy or whoever else is involved in specific data, either collection or management or processing. At the same time, we would welcome the opportunity to contribute. And many of the admin team people, again, some of the co-presenters here, but also others, would be excellent co-authors. So many of these people have published extensively, they have extensive experience in research in general, but also with these specific data. Many of these people are extremely knowledgeable when it comes to data analysis, notably, again, Justin, Wendy, Lonju, for example, is another statistician in residence, so to speak. So it's very, very efficient and effective and feasible to have them on the team because they can run some sophisticated analysis for you. The data can become quickly overwhelming. So people often say, just give me all of the data. And sometimes I foolishly do. And then they always come back like 2 weeks later and say, oh, it's just too much. I cannot figure out what's going on. So it's very good to have someone on the team who knows the data and can help you with that. So, and many of them are simply good writers and diligent co-authors. Again, my co-presenters here have, been involved in many studies and they're extremely, extremely diligent and productive. And so some of them, the testament of their, productivity and diligence is the number of publications. Some have surprised us many times. Like I still have that image in my mind from 2018 when we had the Xculture hackathon in Wisconsin. And so we had then to relocate to AAB conference on a bus. And I remember everybody's joking, like Justin was there and I was there and a few other people. And Wendy, after like a week of nonstop research, she's on her laptop in the back row doing some research. So some people are, extremely dedicated. And so having co-authors like that would be extremely beneficial for the effort. So, but at the same time, as I said, nobody gets to be a co-author just because they, were involved here. But I hope that when you request the data, you recognize that a lot of effort went into collecting those data. A lot of effort goes into preparing the data. A lot of effort goes into conversations back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so, obviously people cannot do it just out of the goodness of their heart. And so if you see that someone's either has been involved already or is willing to help, I would strongly encourage you to invite those people because, it does take some time. And so I'll show you a couple of files and then I'll turn the microphone to my co-authors. So this is where I keep most of the stuff related to the data. And so that's the actual files. Let me just make sure that I share the correct screen. Yes. And so here you have all of the entities. And so I'll open a couple here. So for example, individual code book and team code book, I'll just show them what those look like. But before I get to the code books, there is also one file that I use all the time, and it's extremely useful for me. That's the measures and experimental conditions. So this file shows me semester by semester what was measured and when. So from 2010 all the way to 2023. So we just added the latest one. And so here I have the full list of constructs. So not variables, but constructs, a total of 200 of them. And so I have a record for myself of what was measured and when. Like, for example, English test every semester before the project starts in survey one. Asking how much the course, how much of the course is allocated to Xculture, course grade. Asking every time, sometimes in the beginning or in the middle and towards the end, for example. Some things like, for example, choice of the company asked not only every semester, but every week, week after week. Deliverables, block 1 is usually in survey 5, so which would be week 3, block 2, block 3, final report, and all of that. Then we get to some fun stuff, like, for example, I was working on preparing data for a study that deals with personality and cultural values. And so I was trying to figure out when we measured cultural values and when we measured personality. And so I highlighted those two. And right here, you can see that cultural values we measured with a bunch of different scales. And so like, for example, Dorfman and Howell, I need to scroll and see when we used it. So it seems like we used it in 2017, one time in week 5. And then we used it again in 2018 in week 8. If we look at, for example, U-scale that has been very popular in this project, we used it almost every semester, as you can see. And I even have a note here to myself that one semester, I think it was for Mariana, for your study, Mariana and Christopher, and somehow I managed to miss the last subscale, and so it was incomplete. We had to recollect the data again later on. So, and then later we developed our own scale, published it, so we use that one also quite frequently in the more recent semesters. And then for personality, again, we have the full personality scale, and then we had 2 short personality scales. And again, when you look at them, you can see that we used, for example, short in 2021, 2022, long in also 22. So here you can see that we used both scales in the same semester. Everybody did it twice. So in 1 week, they did it the short version, and the next week they did it the full as the full version and things like that. So that's just something for me to keep track of what we did. And then also I have the same thing for experimental conditions. Like, for example, punishment, I call it, peer evaluations. If they are less than 20%, that's a problem. And so we didn't have that rule up until 2011, and then we imposed that rule. Hired raters, it seems like we had it only a couple of times. Coaches providing feedback, we had it in these many semesters. Then what else we have here? Team charter. So we had like a bunch of semesters when team charter was required. And apparently in some of these semesters, we had this as optional and some as required and things like that. So that's the file that I just keep for myself to keep track of the data. Finally, this is what the data code books look like. And so the data file uses a variable name as the variable name. So this row, the variable name is vertical. It's vertical in the code book, but it would be the horizontal first row in the actual data file. And so if you, for example, have a variable called AF should 16, so then you can just look for this variable in the data file. It will be column 74. And that will be the name of the variable, and then you'll see the data. And so as you can see here, we have 3.5 thousand variables, but it doesn't mean that we measured every single variable every single time. Like some things, such as, for example, age, as you can see, so here you have the semesters, all of them, and you have the count for each semester of the variables. So if we look at, for example, age, let me highlight this one just. So age was measured every single semester. And so we had like 3,000 people, 1,000 people, early track, late track. So here you have the list of semesters and the number of people that reported their age. Same thing with gender. So you have many of them. Notably, gender is always a little bit fewer people seem to report their gender. So I'm not sure, maybe some people don't want to do that. Maybe some people, I don't know, did not fit in the binary scale that we used. I think we changed it this semester finally. So things like that. Then when, for example, you look at the barriers to team effectiveness, expected problems, and then observed problems, again, as you can see, we measured every single semester. But then some things like bullying, for example, one of my PhD students was doing a study on bullying. And so we collected data for him for 2 semesters, and then we didn't collect it anymore. So bullying was measured only in 2019 2A, and then a little bit in 2B, and so on and so forth. So this way, when you request the data, you can go by what we measured, but you need to make sure that you have the variables that you need to correlate in the same semester. Because if you want to study the effects of bullying on gender, for example, yes, you will have gender in every semester, bullying in one semester. But if you wanted to study bullying and, for example, I don't know, cultural intelligence, you need to check whether or not cultural intelligence was actually measured in that semester. So conflict frequency, for example, that's something that we measure every week. And as you can see, pretty much every semester with some minor changes, like maybe it was not measured in one of the weeks, or maybe it was slightly different wording. Finally, it's interesting here. So for the longitudinal variables, we have at the variable name, at the end of the variable name, we have this at. And so that would be at survey 3, at survey 4, at survey 5, at survey 6. So the data are shaped wide, not long, I guess, in this case. For each time instance, we have a separate column. So the time series variables would be shaped wide. You can always reshape them, but that's what you would have. And so, as I said, usually the number corresponds to the survey number. So pre-product survey would be 1, then we have 2 in the first week, and then 4 would be at the end of the second week, 5 would be at the end of the third week, and so on and so forth. And usually 11 is the last one. We used to have, like if the semester is shorter, it would be 10, but lately I just use 11 to signify the last week. Even if there were fewer weeks, I just skip then 10 and it just goes directly to 11, just little things here. So yeah, and then you just look at the topic. You can find some more details, like for example, conflict, a lone conflict scale that focuses on the relationship. Then you have the actual original question. So that was the question. Then you have the scale. So it was from 1 to 5 with not at all to very much. And then if it's an published established scale, you would even have the scale name. Like for example, conflict frequency was measured. So it's an extended scale of conflicts in teams. That's the questions. That's the scale. And it was the scale from Jen and Mannix, published in 2001. This one, it's something that Lon Zhu and Bob Stevens came up with, 2 of our co-authors. So it's not published, but it's their scale. So I put it here so that I know and can find it later on. And I even indicate in which week it was measured, if it was like a one-time thing, just in case, because again, sometimes that matters. So now what happens in many cases when people get the full file, so they often get overwhelmed. As I said, if you wanted to print it as a Word file, it will be probably 1,000 pages. It's just too much. Often at that stage, people complain that the data are poorly organized, but in reality, just too much. It's just hard to go through because it's so much. And then in terms of the mistakes that often happen when people request data, so they would take the code book, they would diligently review the code book. And in some cases, they would make assumptions about the data that are not true. Like, for example, people would say, give me this variable. I want to measure trust in teams. And I look at the variable and it's Swift trust. So it's not how much trust is in team. It's how much people are inclined to trust strangers. So it's a personality trait. It's not what's going on in the team. So people sometimes don't recognize that and they may just not see it. And vice versa. Sometimes people need a variable and they do not realize that we have it because the name is not very informative. Like we have a variable called team chemistry. And so what does it mean? People sometimes just skip it, but then they say, hey, I want to measure, how much people sort of get involved at the personal level, maybe not talking about the task, but talking about personal things. And I'm like, oh, we have a variable like that. It's called team chemistry. So it's not always immediately visible. So that's why when you request data, it's always a good idea to sit down together and then basically take a look at those variables together and then extract or highlight the variables that you need together. So this will ensure that you use the right variables, you didn't miss anything, and then we will prepare the data and send them to you for your analysis. I'm going to stop here. So I'm not sure if there are any questions, but maybe Wendy, Justin, Ernesto, Mariana, if you want to share your comments, thoughts, observations. I see Ernesto raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Vas. I am indeed not the person that should speak after Vas. There are so many people that are so much more experienced than I am. Even in the Italian ranking, I am indeed second to Mariana, that has been publishing so much on the Culture database, but I have to leave. So that's why I've been taking the floor just now to share my experience with you. And I have to say, Vas has been telling many wonderful things. I agree. For me, it was great to do research in X-Culture. Thanks to this project, I was able to publish on the Harvard Business Review, the International Business Review, the Journal of International Management, and for certain, I would not be able probably to publish on those journals by my own. So it has been indeed a great experience. But I also want to say something. As we say in Italy, it is not all roses and flowers, in the sense that many things can go wrong. For example, I remember my first projects. It was about cohesion. Livio is here. I can see him. And we started the projects in 2014, and we were able to publish it in 2022, if I am not wrong. So we have been taking 8 years. We have not been working for 8 years. But due to lack of communication and so on, we have been taking a lot of time. Nonetheless, if I should go back, I would do it again. It has been great working on that project and seeing it publishing in the end. But probably one of the reasons of this delay is that, for example, me and Livio, we have not been meeting for years. We just met maybe 1 year ago, I think, or even less actually. And so sometimes you work online with people that you do not know, and this can actually create a problem of communication, misunderstanding. So this actually may happen. I remember the ranking paper that we have been able to publish with us and Mariana. I think it is an amazing paper that we published on the European Journal of International Management. I think it would have been deserving a better paper than a better journal than that one. But again, it has been taking many years. In that case, it is probably the only case where I've been taking the entire charge of the data analysis. And I remember I've been working on that paper for so long. So it was not efficient from an academic point of view because it has been a tremendous amount of work, but nonetheless, it has been a great satisfaction to see it in the end. So very often we are under recording. Sometimes it is like a sort of blind date. You can be lucky or not, depending on your attitude in working on cultural differences and so on. So, for example, I think, but Wendy is going to speak about that, or Justin, I am certain, the hackathon that we have once a year, 2 years, is a wonderful opportunity because you see the people for 1 week, you spend time together, so you know them, you know their way of working. So this is actually going to help. On the opposite, if you start, as at the beginning it was, I remember with ranking and cohesion, we started working with people that we never met. And some of them we never met, not even after publication. So in that case, it is going to be more difficult just because you need some human touch. If you're working for years on something that is hard, facing those horrible reviewers when you send the paper, facing those rejections, you need some trust and some commitment. But I don't want to take more time than this. It has been great, and I am committed to work on this database again in the future. Thank you, Vas.
Thank you, Ernesto. Wendy, maybe you want to say a few words about the hackathons, what they are, how we do them, since you've been organizing so many of them, and maybe Justin also as a co-organizer of several of them.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm assuming Justin's going to talk about the database because he's like the guru there. So I think he'll permit me to talk about the hackathon. And again, Justin started this. This was originally his baby, and I just sort of weaseled my way into the fun. So the idea behind the hackathon, as Ernesto had said, is that it's really that time where we can come together and meet. Now we've tried this in the past online, and we've tried it hybrid. And we really came to the conclusion that the best method for doing this is in person, where we really get to sit down, have a chat around the table about things we never knew about you, really get to know each other at that deeper level, because once we do go away from one another, we are very much online. We're in different countries. Right now, I'm working on a team with people from the US, from the Netherlands, from Austria, from France, and we're not going to be able to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk things through. So we really have to have faith in the people that we're working with. And that's where the hackathons come into play. And originally, correct me if I'm wrong, Vaz, but the idea was Vaz had so much data, let's hack it and see what we can find. Yeah. And that's still largely what we do. We do look at that secondary data. We do try to find new findings from it. But at the same token, we're also starting to realize that we can use this as a vehicle for some of those more timely things. For example, I'm involved in a project or two that, as is Ernesto, on artificial intelligence. And how is that, what are the implications there from various perspectives with regards to working with one another? So through the X Culture platform, we were able to meet, we were able to talk through our ideas, we were able to start putting together ideas, and we were able to do it in a way that was consistent with how it could be incorporated into X Culture. So long story short, I don't want to talk too much, but if you do have time, and if you are interested in doing research and establishing an international collaborative. The hackathon is really an opportunity to meet new researchers, meet new people, form those relationships, and have those international collaborations.
Yeah. Plus, in addition, we always try to organize them on campus of a university. Like the last one was in Boston. What was it? Emerson College. So, and before that, it was in what were before that? Seattle, University of Seattle. And so we stay in the dormitories, like real dorms, and usually we're the only ones there because it's summer. So and then have some fun and you know, sometimes go and see the city and have, you know, do research from early in the morning till late at night. But at the same time, like I remember in Wisconsin, Justin took us on a boat ride, and we had, you know, this on this Mississippi River, had a nice, you know, sort of dinner on a boat. And I don't know, in Seattle we had a grand piano in the lobby. So, and then one of the colleagues brought a guitar, so we had some karaoke. And then in Boston, yes, Lonju was singing for us some Chinese songs as well. So it was, you know, it's a nice kind of being back in college type of deal. But people get to know each other not only around research, but also many of them then, you know, visit each other as visiting scholars. Many of them get involved in other projects that didn't come from the research hackathon itself. And so originally the plan was that we would go in a few days from idea to a publishable paper. In reality, it becomes, you know, it's more like going from idea to a fully developed plan. So we have, you know, looked at the data, got some initial results, received multiple rounds of feedback from the colleagues. So you sort of have your team, you know who's doing what, you know how you do it, you get some initial results, but then you still do a lot of work at home. So you cannot really finish the paper in a few days, but you can progress, you know, do a lot in that time. So Mariana, Justin, did you want to say anything?
Well, I may say something if Justin doesn't want to step in, so I can say something. When I was invited to this meeting, I checked when was my first paper on X culture, and it was actually in 2014, so it's almost a decade ago, a long time ago. I remember that I met Vas for the very first time in Orlando, either at the AIB or AOM. And I was so excited to have access to this data. And it turned out to a paper that was then published 2014 in Journal of International Management. And then the journey went on, and we had a lot of papers. I counted that I have 8 publications, 2 under review, and 4 ongoing projects at the moment. And we went from Journal of World Business to Journal of Organizational Behavior. And I think the biggest success now is the Journal of Applied Psychology that we just got accepted. So it's been a long journey, but a very nice one. I thought I would say something what you can do with the data and where I see the limits of the data. Maybe that's also important. Well, the data is obviously good for everything that involves students. So if you want to do paper studies on students, student projects, educational projects, that's obviously very good. But we have mainly, at least I have focused on more of the management type of papers in management journals. And then I think, to my opinion, you should do studies that where you examine something where it doesn't matter that your subjects are students. We know it's quite difficult to publish papers with student samples, though this is a little bit different in that sense that they are working on a real life project. But I think if you use items that, for example, examine team behavior or something that it really doesn't matter that the sample is students, I think it's a good database to use. You can do studies at the individual team or at multi-level. So that's obviously very, very nice for publication. And obviously you can examine things where international or intercultural differences are examined, and that's what the data is very, very, very useful for. And yeah, then it doesn't really, to my opinion, matter that the sample are students. Where do I see the limits of the data?
Mariana,
well,
can I interject here? So I'll add a few more examples of the types of research that has been done with the data. So obviously anything and everything related to teams, global virtual teams, cross-cultural comparisons, and things like that. But we also had a number of publications that dealt not with teams, so just some general HR stuff. We had some publications that had nothing to do with the project at all. So we had publications, for example, where we compared, like recently published in the Journal of World Business, where we compared 7 most popular cultural value instruments. So it's more of a method study, but to evaluate the quality of those instruments, we used X-Culture students to collect the data. So in this case, X-Culture was simply used to collect the data. We had likewise, for example, a few publications in marketing. So one of my PhD students did a study where she wanted to know if the country of origin of the product affects the evaluation of the product. And so she had some mock-up advertisements of different, I think it was some clothing and some perfumes or cosmetics. And so in one condition, it said that it was made in China, and in the other condition, it was said that it's made in Italy. But everything else was the same models, same pictures, and people were asked to evaluate how likely they are to buy a product and how much they're willing to pay. So again, in this case, we did use X-Culture to collect the data, but it had nothing to do with X-Culture, just a convenient sample. Surprisingly, I published a few studies on robotics, like literally robots. So again, with some colleagues, so we used X-Culture for data collection, where we showed videos of different robots to students asking, would you welcome a robot like that in your home? And so some of them looked cute and nice, others looked more like Terminators. And so we wanted to know if people from different cultures have a different perception about robots in their life. And so again, in this case, it was not team-based. It had nothing to do with the project itself. We just use it for data collection. We had a few studies on strategy, so business strategy, like one PhD student, in fact, I think it was the first dissertation. So she wanted to know if managers make strategic business choices based on biases. And so before the project started, we asked them what countries they like. And then at the end, she looked what countries they chose as the most promising market for the client. And interestingly enough, yes, people actually chose more countries that they liked. Like more people were saying, let's do business in Switzerland or Italy. And fewer people were saying, let's do business in whatever countries are not very popular, even though economically maybe it didn't make sense. So it was more kind of strategy type of question. Plus, lastly, we do a lot of experiments. So it's not only questionnaires, we do a lot of experiments. Like in some semesters, we would ask students to maybe, have a team charter to see if it makes a difference. In one semester or several semesters, we had cash prizes for the winners to see if that makes a difference. In some semesters, we had the leaderboard where each week we would score teams and basically say your team is 220 in the ranking and your team is 5, to see how that affects performance. Or in one semester, we had a discussion board where teams could exchange ideas. And so things like that. So you can embed all kinds of experiments into the study. And so all of those would be suitable venues. Sometimes people try to push it too far. Like I, for example, had a request to collect data on how much students sleep, to see if sleep affects performance. And so they wanted everyone to install an app that tracks how and when you sleep. That was a little too much. Somebody else wanted to do a study on the effects of diet on performance. And again, they wanted to install an app that would basically track what you eat. Again, that was a little too distal, so I said no to those. But otherwise, as long as it has something to do with management, with business, if we don't have the data, we may be willing to collect those data for you. So limitations. Sorry, Mariana, please.
Yeah. So where the limits of the data maybe are. It is hard to do longitudinal studies on the same sample. So to have the same students for a longer period of time. The project is typically 9 weeks, and that's a very short period of time to observe a change, I would say. So that's obviously a challenge that I see that is there. We have a lot of people who do not answer all of the questions. So there are a lot of empty answers, and that's sometimes very challenging if you have a very specific research question. So you might have people who then either drop out or do not answer the questions. And that is especially challenging if you examine the team, because if you have a lot of empty answers, eventually you might have a very small team to examine, for example. And It is also sometimes challenging if you do data analysis with the data that already exists, that some data has not been collected in the same semester, then you have some other data. So then you don't have the same people ask for variable A than for variable B or whatever it is. So that's a little bit challenging, that working with the data, I would say. On the other hand, as I said, I've been now here for 10 years, so obviously it's a nice project, and I very much enjoy working with the people involved. And we also had a small junior faculty workshop here in Bolzano at the beginning of this year, where many of the ex-culture people also participated, and I think that was also a really nice event to talk about the data set, but also to see each other in person and have some maybe different type of exchange as well. So it's nice to make friends and long-lasting research partners. Obviously, some people I have been working from the very beginning on with and still do. So it is good. But maybe also something that Vas said as well. There are obviously, as in any team project, situations where some people do not contribute or don't just have the time to work on the project, I would say. And then it's also important to know when to step down from a project, or when to say, okay, this time I cannot contribute, but I would do the next time, or whatever it is. I think honesty is something that is very important part of the ex-culture teamwork. I don't think we are mad if somebody cannot do something. It's just that one should say that when it happens. But all in all, I would say this has been a great journey, and I'm happy to be part of the project.
Thank you so much. So let's open it for the questions. And while you're thinking what you want to ask, I'll share with you a couple of ideas that have been around for a long time, but never have been sort of finished. So those would be projects that perhaps are open for grabs, so to speak, if you wanted to step in and complete it. So it might be of most interest to maybe PhD students. If you guys are looking for the topic, this could be an existing topic, or for those of you professors who are productive and can finally finish it. Like, as I said, proactive personality. So we did find that people with a proactive personality profile perform better. I think we presented it like in 2013. And somehow, I don't know what happened. I think one of the lead authors retired or something like that. And so the study has never been finished. We collected some additional data. So it's a simple study, nothing super special about it. But if somebody wants to finish it, that would be nice. There was a big fanfare, we thought about a study on why different people evaluate each other differently. And here we are talking both about peer evaluation differences, but also about how different professors evaluate different reports. Some people are harsh, strict, some people are lenient, some people differentiate a lot from person to person, report to report, others give everything the same score. We thought maybe it's culture, maybe it's something else. We did a lot of work there over the years, and somehow it never went anywhere. I think we didn't find as clean separation or effects of culture, for example, as we expected, but it seems like a very interesting study. So basically evaluation styles by culture, by personality, by, a lot of attempts to do something related to leadership, who gets to be a leader, what kind of leader is more effective. Again, a lot of kind of going on, but never really, was published in those specific formats. So again, lots of open opportunities there. The biggest one, and that's something that I so much want someone to take over and actually do something, qualitative data. We have literally hundreds of thousands of pages of qualitative data, weekly comments, comments on each other in peer evaluations. The reports themselves are essentially qualitative data. And at least 4 or 5 times somebody would step up and say, oh, I'm using this in vivo, or I'm using AI. I'm going to, mine those qualitative data sets and, find something. And so we had ideas like, is it true that men talk more about the task and women talk more about the relationships? How do comments change, sentiments change from week to week? Is it true that collectivists talk more about relationships and individualists focus on, rewards? We can do all of those studies. And somehow, all the people who sort of said, I will do it, somehow they didn't. And so, but it seems to me like we have all those qualitative data that, by the way, can be matched with quantitative data. And somehow, we had one paper that I actually was involved where we interviewed free writers, and it was an interview-based qualitative study that was published, but other than that, I don't think we've had any qualitative publications. There was also several attempts, and that's my fault. I was sort of in charge at least of some of those studies, communication. So like the simple stuff would be, do teams that use video, do they perform better than the teams that use only email? But then there were also all kinds of studies around that, communication, channel richness, tightness, looseness, all those kinds of things. And I think there is even something going on still now, but there is so much room for that one. And we collected so much data that I'd like to see maybe more research, because we can, the cultural, the communication, rich lean media, then the choice of tool. We even now are trying to do something with virtual reality. So I think this study is sort of picking up again, but we have years and years of old data, and I'm not sure if it's going to go anywhere unless somebody comes up and does something with it. We did a study and even presented at the conference on so-called biculturals or multiculturals. So people who grew up in multiple cultures, like if your parents are, one German, one Japanese, or if you were born in Canada, then grew up in Germany and then live in the United States. So you kind of have multiple cultural identities. Does it help? And so we even had the analysis, and we even found something. And yet somehow we never really, never published it. So again, maybe it's time to give it another jolt and bring it back to life. And lastly, there were a bunch of attempts to do something related to network analysis, from peer evaluations, how different people evaluate one another, not just the averages, but who evaluates whom and how, and reciprocity, or maybe some asymmetries, like have you had conflicts this week? And so one person says I did, and the other team member says I didn't. And they talk about each other, but they have different perception. Or like for example, maybe who communicated with whom and things like that. And so sometimes there are interesting effects there. It's a little bit more mathematically complicated. And so there have been several people who tried to do something with it, and to my knowledge, it didn't go anywhere. So those are some of the examples of seemingly very promising studies that sort of went to sleep at some point and have not been fully realized. So, but anyway, let's see if we have questions. I see Isidro is raising his hand, and Justin is here. I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything in addition to what we already said before we get to the questions.
I have a few comments, but please, let's pass the baton before I go.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone from Ecuador. Thank you, Bas, and the whole team. This is my 10th or 12th time with X-Culture. It's just an amazing experience, just fantastic experience. For us, it's mandatory. Here we have the International Negotiation Bachelor's, which is taught in English, and we have a mandatory third language. So it's just perfect. And our students, the satisfaction rate is just amazing. We are, this is a game changer for us, and this is mandatory for the first year. We have something similar on the third year, which is the Global Business Challenge with Team Academia, that is for third year. But again, I just want to propose myself, to embark in, I have a good data. Actually, my research dissertation was on intercultural competencies, measurement of intercultural development and competencies. So that can meet up with that. So again, I just want to say thank you. Count on me or any research proposal from South America. And then we can, if you want, add that as a added value into the research measurements, how to measure intercultural competence. For example, we can assess before the game begins and after the game begins. We can apply the IDI, which is the Intercultural Development Index, or the Global Mindset, or any other tool that is on the market. So that's an idea. A very longitudinal study. So again, I'm going to put my contact there, Bas. Thank you so much. And that
would be a very good study. So plus we've already collected quite a lot of data along those lines. So we may already have good data. And then if new data need to be collected, we can do that as well. Yeah. By the way, I see Sardar is here, David is here. You guys have been involved also extensively, so I'm not sure if you have any comments or questions or tips. Livio, same thing. So you've been working on a bunch of studies. So if you want to maybe share some things or concerns or warnings or advice, please do.
Hi, yeah. I've been involved. I think, yeah, this is like 12th time I'm
Yes,
like
I participated
using,
from almost from the very beginning, right? So
yeah, but unfortunately, I could not, never, involved in research. I was at the UNCG like 7 years ago,
yeah,
and I worked on a model, but it didn't, work out really fine. So, but then somehow, the data set is really big. So I think you have to really maybe for a year just focus on that data. I was wondering actually, and sometimes, I mean, the problem for me here in the Istanbul where I teach at big university, the classes are usually large, like over 100 students, and the X culture is compulsory. So I do a lot of a grading towards the end of the semester, and you already get like exhausted, and you already start like forgetting about the data part.
yeah,
Yeah. So I think probably, yeah, you have to spend like at least a summer or 2 semesters to really get something going in terms of research. But I was wondering, does the new version have any variables that measure satisfaction levels or subjective well-being of the students? I mean, psychological measures that sort of measure their experience other than, objective performance, criteria.
So we do measure a lot of satisfaction related to the project, and I think at least once or twice we had something more like subjective well-being, but that's not a variable that we measure every semester. So we do have something, but not much on general life satisfaction. To your comment about a lot of report grading, so we're actually now doing a bunch of experiments with using AI for report evaluation. And so the initial results are very promising. So not only AI may be suitable for evaluating the reports because the results are very, very consistent with what humans do, but AI may even be better because AI gives you more detailed and more developmental feedback than humans. So hopefully it will work. And so we have a few people involved in that project. And if so, maybe we will not have to do much grading at all. We'll get nice, the robots will do our work. So we'll see how that goes. All right, so yes, Livy, you wanted to say something? I think your microphone is muted.
If I can have one comment, Vas?
Yeah, please.
I think that X culture is great. The data is extraordinary. Sometimes I feel like a child on the playground. I just can get and play with whatever I like, and there are many things to like there. I would suggest that maybe it will be helpful for us to be a little bit more coordinated, meaning to know every time who is working on what. That will help a little bit our work. I think it will make it a little bit more effective and will avoid redundancies. For example, I learned now about some of us working on the same topics, like satisfaction or relation between satisfaction and performance in global virtual teams. And obviously, we can use the wisdom, the findings from anyone else in our own research. We do not, how should I say, walk the same road many different times and rediscover the wheel. So I was wondering if, in addition to what we have, and of course we have on X Culture website a lot of information about the project that are ongoing, we can have a more, how should I say, more synchronous form of updating. Maybe, I don't know, Facebook group like X Culture Satisfaction, let's say, in which those of us who are working on data using X Culture data on global virtual team satisfaction would be members, so as we can know in real time what everyone is doing, and obviously benefit from the work of those of us who are a little bit more advanced. It's just an idea. Maybe we can find some other venue. Maybe it's just me being less, how should I say, attentive to everything that happens around. But I believe that this kind of coordination would benefit all of us.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking maybe we should map, like, for example, so here where I have my folder data requests. So each of these, that's when somebody asked for the data, and it looks like it was like 127 times. And it may not be a bad idea to maybe sometimes find a day, go through this list and check where each of these studies stands. So maybe some of them have been completed, maybe some of them still are going on, and maybe some of them are dormant, and maybe some of them, as you said, are even overlapping in some ways. Same thing here when we get to the list of ongoing studies, research projects. Again, I need to clean it up because it seems like several of these have been published and I didn't update it, but maybe also check with people where I don't know where the study stands, maybe reach out to them and say, hey, are you still working on this? Are you still interested in finishing it? Maybe somebody else needs to take over, or maybe it's been published and I just didn't know, didn't update it. So it may not be a bad idea. I'm not sure if I'll have the time where I should put one of my graduate assistants to do it, or maybe David's research interest group will take over and, create some, but that's a very fair comment because a lot of the stuff has gone on and it seems like we are not keeping track of all of the developments very well.
Okay, can I jump in now? Maybe this is a
Please
good place.
go ahead.
So that is a terrific idea in the sense that I think it's always fruitful to look for ways to connect across boundaries, because two papers might be doing similar things and they can inform each other. Or maybe the teams look together and they say, oh, you're a team of two, I'm a team of two, let's together make a team of four and we can really help each other. But at the same time, I'm not sure how effective that would be. But so we'd have to think about that, because on many projects that I feel like I'm working on, we start off and looking at, let's say we're not looking at a DV, we're looking at IV, but our theory doesn't work with the DV that we had in mind. So we switch DVs. So we can be in multiple buckets at the same time because we're testing an idea and we're going to see what fits, like what model structure actually fits our expectation. So I'm not sure how you would create those buckets to have everyone work together. Maybe you just create a Facebook group and let just people talk or something. So we would have to think about how to do that connection. But maybe to connect with what Wendy says, a great place to do that would be the hackathon, where we could sit together and just sort of brainstorm. What are you working on? And can I help you? Or we have more of a flexible, organic, shall we say, discussion. But to sort of tie in some loose ends, I guess from what Mariana was discussing. So some good things. She mentioned that a limitation of the data would be the fact that it's typically about 8 weeks long. I actually see that as a positive. So it depends on how you interpret it. Because in the analysis that I'm running, I often, if not always, see a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right. And so in some maybe company teams, there's never an end. They just continue working on stuff. So you don't see the phenomenon of closure. And like one of the classic examples would be in the peer evaluations. Well, they go up and up and up and up until the post-project, right, where there's no retaliation available. And all of a sudden, magically, they go down. Right. And so that's very insightful in terms of group dynamics that you don't often get in a real world. But at the same time, I guess one of my concerns that Mariana mentioned so well as well is that how do we as an X-Culture community get beyond the barrier of an editor or a reviewer saying, you have a student sample, we don't like it, right? How do we break through that barrier? And that's a question that to which I do not have an answer, and I would actually seek your guidance as a community.
Yeah. I would say to that, remember that we are working on a study, and maybe I need help because it's been a long process and I still haven't finished. So a study that specifically explores when we can use student samples, when we cannot use it, basically when the difference between student and non-student exists and when it doesn't. So we've seen, and in fact, for this study, I've collected a lot of literature, and so there are a lot of editorial letters, for example, where editors speculate about these things. So they would say, well, if you want to study maybe like attention or reaction time, it doesn't really matter if you have students or if you have employees. But if you want to study, for example, political attitudes or something like that, obviously those things change with time. Sure. Likewise, for example, if you study compensation, real job, real salary is very different than a simulation in the classroom. Kind of makes sense. But then again, how much is the difference? Does it really lead to a difference? those are questions that are largely unanswered. Likewise, we know that when it's a student sample that is simulating something, like for example, students will be said, okay, imagine that you're in Africa and you imagine that you're in North America and now communicate. That's obviously not the same thing as communicating, across real cultural divides. So in X culture, that seems to be not a problem. Likewise, in X culture, if you think that something changes with age, well, we have enough students who are 30 years old, 40 years old. In a way, we can account for the effects of age and maybe experience if needed. So is that a problem or not? But anyway, I'm trying to do a study that has 4 components. One, it's a simply review of how student samples have been used in research in general. And so I took 9 IB journals and I took every single paper for every single journal from the beginning of time that mentioned the word student and coded them. So every time they mentioned student, I coded whether it was just mentioning the student or it was a student sample, and then describing if it was a student sample, what was the question, how it was used. The next step, I'm looking at meta-analytic studies that specifically had student, non-student as one of the moderators. And so I found about 45 of those where they literally say, okay, we studied XYZ. And so we found, 200 studies that used student samples and 300 studies that used non-student samples. And here is the difference. And so I basically do like a meta-analysis of meta-analyses. Then I coded the student sample studies that I found. And so I'm trying to see what are the topics. And then now I'm actually at the stage where I'm trying to find enough papers that use student samples. And then the next step will be to find other papers that use non-student samples and then do a series of my meta-analytic studies to see if there is a difference. And so the goal here is not only to describe the problem, but also to describe what the field has been doing over time. Like we know that JIBS almost never publishes student-based samples, but we know that the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, it's almost exclusively students, for example. So things like that. But then also explore, so for which variables there is a difference, for which variables there are no differences, how much is the difference, in which direction. And based on that, my hope is that we will be able then have some conclusions as to when it is appropriate to use student samples, when it is not, what are the maybe boundary conditions and things like that. And hopefully that will also give us some sort of a support for X culture that, maybe if it's not appropriate, we will just not do those kind of studies. And if it is appropriate, we can then provide empirical evidence that it's not making a huge difference what kind of sample that is. And so I've been trying to do that study. I have tons of data, lots of work has been done, but it has not been finished yet. And in fact, I see here a couple of my own graduate students who helped me with the coding part. So maybe I need someone else productive as Mariana or Wendy or Justin, so that we finally can finish it up, because we do have the data. We just need to finish it. We even have an implicit agreement at some point. I talked with an editor of one of the top IB journals who said, yes, if you do it, we'll publish it, because that seems like a very important study. Not to mention that anyone whoever uses student samples will probably cite that study. So that may be one of the ways to address the concerns the editors have about our student sample. So.
Okay, so that's a great comment. Can I make one more comment, and then we'll
go ahead, please.
So the other thing that I heard in the discussion is what's missing. Voss sort of listed a bunch of papers that are in progress, and maybe here's another one. What I see in the X culture studies that have been published, and granted I haven't read them all because there's so many of them, but complexity. Right. Sometimes we have complex ideas, but do we have complex measures that capture a real world phenomenon? So one of the papers that come to mind is a organization science paper by Mel and colleagues. They began to actually measure the temporal distance, and they use GPS coordinates. That is a phenomenal idea, right? And we have that richness in X culture. Voss mentioned the networks. Well, now you can sort of get at some of these things. Now, I'm not sure all the peer evaluations could be configured or understood as networks, but now what does it mean to be central in a network or peripheral, and how does that affect, so complexity in the way we think about these phenomena, measure them and test them. I think we can really support, I guess, the community by instead of doing a simple like experimental condition or binary thing into there are some methods that can actually expand on like control variables in a study. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. So the complexity of measures and methods.
Yeah. And Justin, I would also say that the opposite may be also not a bad idea, like something extremely simple. for journals like Psychological Reports that, publish like 2-page studies. Like, for example, we measured a bunch of things in dozens of countries. Maybe we can do a series of papers on simply national rankings, on personality profiles, on cultural intelligence, on language proficiency, on you name it. We just submitted a paper with another colleague that looks at self-perceived worth. Like 80% of drivers think that they're above the average. We kind of did the same thing, but we ranked it by country. So we wanted to see which people from which countries tend to overestimate their self-worth. And so found some interesting results, but maybe we can do those kind of national rankings for a bunch of variables and have each like a 2-page, 3-page quick report. It will not make it into a top journal, but it could be a good way to get some quantity of publications. So little things, simple things like that. I'm sure there are journals that publish these short reports. So that's also an option. Anyway, we are over time, so let's stop here. So I hope people, you will now you know more about the study, the data that we have, and if you decided to use it, just let me know. We'll maybe put you up in contact either with me or one of our sort of, let's call it senior researchers, and they'll help you with selecting the data. And then I guess it's up to you to use those data and hopefully publish something. But so I'll turn the microphone back to David. David, I'm not sure if you have any closing remarks. So
I want to thank everybody for participating, especially all of the speakers. I have some limited experience working with the data and publishing at middling levels with it. The comments that have been made were particularly pointed for me because they made a lot of sense. The one thing I can add, and we can close on that, is that I think that for people new to this or new to working with the data, that I wrote down that with me, and I've noticed with others that I've initially published with that had not had experience with the data or the data set, that there's a certain level of naivete on the complexity of method or data analysis required to bring their ideas to fruition. Mariana mentioned one thing that took me a little while to understand, was that only certain measures are collected at certain times. So you have to understand that you don't have comparable data. You can go through the data set and see these great measurements and say, oh yeah, I can come up with an idea with that. It's already collected. But then you realize, wait, it wasn't collected at in the same sessions. And so you've got totally different samples and it's not comparable data. So it's important to understand that and understand the complexity of the data analysis required for your idea. And if and to be introspective about your capabilities as a data analyst. And if you're not at the level that's required to do, let's say, multi-level analysis, if it's required, or sim modeling in various ways, then you need to find somebody that can work well with that data and partner up with them. That's all I have to say. But I think the people that spoke have tremendously more experience than I do with this data and publishing. So everything they said was very, very useful. Wendy, you have your hand up? Or
I just wanted to say as a closing note, for those of you who didn't see in the chat, we have a link to a sign-up form for anybody who wants to be notified when we're collecting applications for the next hackathon. So some people who might not be in the know. What's that?
Which will be in Chicago in the summer. Is that
correct? It'll be in Chicago right ahead of AOM.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And to David's comment, so if we don't have the data you need, if you have a good study idea, so something that will lead to good publications, we will collect the data for you. So every semester we collect data for like 3-4 studies, maybe 5 sometimes. So if you have a good publishable idea, so to speak, and have a clear design and need some data, we may be able to help with that as well.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right. Well, I want to close it by thanking everybody. We did go a little over time, but that's always, we would stop it if it wasn't productive, and it was very productive. So I want to thank everybody for attending and thank the speakers. And I look forward to another productive XRIG when we can arrange a good topic, either later this semester or early in the spring.
Thank you, David, for organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for organizing.